Welcome back to the Total Confidence Podcast, Season 3. I am super excited to talk to our guest, who I had the pleasure of meeting in San Francisco for the International Enneagram Association Global Conference. Chichi Agorom did the keynote address, and it was amazing, and we'll get into that. But just as a background for those of you who may not be familiar, Chichi Agorom is a writer, a certified Enneagram teacher and practitioner through the Narrative Tradition, associate faculty at the Narrative Enneagram, and a former psychotherapist whose life's work is to support people on their journey towards wholeness and healing. Her greatest joy is learning how to belong to herself and creating spaces, both physically and with her words, to help others feel less alone and more known. Chichi Agorom earned a Master of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Denver Seminary and a Postmaster Certificate in Marriage and Family Therapy from Denver Family Institute. She also holds a coaching certificate from the Enneagram in Business. She lives in Los Angeles, cultivating a life of rest and peace by the water. Welcome to Total Confidence Podcast, Chichi Agorom.
Thank you so much for having me. I didn't know you were going to read the whole thing, but thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm super excited to talk to you. It was such a pleasure meeting you in San Francisco. We have a mutual friend, Milton Stewart, just a wonderful, wonderful person. And so he talked really highly of you. So it was such a pleasure meeting you in San Francisco. I enjoyed your keynote address.
Thank you.
Igniting Change, the Enneagram is a tool for collective liberation. Why did you choose such a theme for the keynote address?
I mean, well, I was required to, so the conference had a theme that was 2 words, unite and ignite. And there was a opening keynote speaker, and then I did the end note. And so the opening keynote speaker was tasked with the unite portion of the theme, and I was given the ignite. So that's really where it came from, was thinking about how the Enneagram can be a tool that helps to ignite change. And I also knew that the audience was going to be predominantly white folks, older white folks. There were people of color, but like the predominant majority was what I expected. And so I was really thinking about like, what is the basically tailoring my message to the majority of the people that would be in the room in a way that helps ignite them to use this tool differently, hold it differently, So
I'm gonna be real. All right. Me and Danielle Fanfare were sitting next to each other, and my mouth dropped. Because it's one thing to speak strong in a room full of Black people, right? You stood up there
Yep.
in the face of all these white people and said things that sometimes we say among each other. I want to know what was going through your mind as you were saying that, and what were you feeling somatically standing there and giving such a powerful but very necessary message at that time?
Yeah, it's funny because so in the moment, this is, most people don't know this, but this is both a blessing and a challenge that I have had over the course of my life, which is that I do my best work under, like, at the last minute, basically. So like in grad school, if I had a paper, a 10, 15-page paper that was due, if I started that paper 5 weeks early, like everybody else did, that's a B paper. If I start that paper 3 days or 2 days before it's due, A+, baby. So that's just the way my brain has always worked. And so I was thinking about and preparing, and I had all these like little notes here and there for that talk, but I truly finished the version of it you heard on the stage. I finished 20 minutes before I came downstairs.
Ooh, okay.
And so to answer your question of how I was feeling in the moment, I was nervous for the first maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And after that, it was like, I genuinely felt like it's so I haven't put this into words yet, but it really felt like there were people behind me that had my back. And I don't even mean the faces of the people I knew that I was seeing in the audience. It was just like this overwhelming sense of like rootedness. So when I got on stage after Milton did my intro, there was a podium, and so I was like kind of behind the podium a bit. And I remember like, I knew I was nervous because my left leg was like wobbly. And really that lasted 3 to 5 minutes. And then it just felt like I was a tree trunk. Like I felt so steady and like, they've got me. My people have got me.
Yeah.
The divine has me. I'm here to say what I'm here to say. And that was the end of Nerves until the end of it. And then I watched it. I didn't watch it back for maybe a couple months. So I watched it only like a few months ago, and my jaw was on the floor because I was like, wait. I said that. I stood up there and I said those things. Like I in the moment, I just felt like I was channeling what needed to be said, and I wasn't really feeling my own, I was there saying what needed to be said. And I watched it back and I was like, I cannot believe I stood up in front of those people and said those words. And I was applauding myself too. After watching it, I was like, dang. I was very proud, to go back and watch it. And I was like, yes, you did the thing that you were there to do. But yeah, in the moment, I wasn't terrified.
Yeah, I just was like amazed, and I talked to I call him my brother, but it's my best friend, and I texted him like immediately after, was like, I'd never seen anything like this in my life. This woman stood there in the face, and of white people, and just basically just told them like, yo, y'all are you have to do your own work as far as dealing with dismantling the system of white supremacy as well. And so it was just mind blowing on top of the overall experience of being there. That really stood out. So I really appreciate you for having the courage to do so. So
Thank you.
So let's go back though, because how did you discover the Enneagram? We are connected on this journey of the Enneagram that has brought myself and yourself and wonderful people and have connected us. But I want to know, like, how did you discover it?
It was introduced to me in grad school by somebody else I was going to school with, and it was having like, I don't know, it wasn't yet quite the season where the Instagram or the Enneagram blew up on Instagram or anything, but because we were studying clinical mental health counseling, we had been using other personality typing tools. And so this person was like, oh, here's this other thing that I just learned about. And I was like, yeah, I'm good. Looks weird. And then someone invited me to like this older man was I don't remember now who he is or where he was trained, but he was doing like an intro session in his living room maybe a few months after. And they were like, just come, like, check it out. And I was like, this still feels weird, like a cult, but I'm gonna go. And so I did. And it was a very like, basic overview of the Enneagram and the different types. And I remember just like very, like the very stereotypical definitions or descriptions of each type. That's really all he was giving. So anxiety type 6, emotions type 4, helpful type 2, just like there was no, it was just that kind of overview. So I was like, okay, well, I have anxiety. I guess I'm a type 6. But that's all I really walked away from that with. There was like a little handout, but I wasn't really intrigued by it until my friend Annie Diamond, who is also a trained through the narrative. She was the one who told me about her experience with the narrative, and like talked about the Enneagram through that lens, which if there are listeners who don't know what that is, like the main difference I would say with the narrative is that it prioritizes storytelling and people's lived experience of the type structure rather than like these very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like reductionist definitions of type. And also like at the time, again, I was in grad school, and like the modality of therapy that I'm the most drawn to is narrative therapy, which is where you are really focused on the stories people tell about themselves, the way you talk about yourself, your struggles, the metaphors, all those sort of things, and using narrative as a technique to help you write a story that is more connected to the truth of who you are. And so I was very drawn to the idea of the narrative paired with the Enneagram. So Annie told me about the program, and then this was back before COVID, so they were still doing the intensives as a 6-day long program in California. So yeah, came out to California, had the intensive, really thought I was going to be like just getting a lot of information, writing down notes. That's what I came prepared for. But the narrative teaches through panels, and real people sit on the panels and like talk about their experiences with this armor that they carry. And I am not a person who loves to cry in public. I absolutely hate it. And so the whole time I was so annoyed because I was like, I came here to take good notes, and I am in my feelings. I was not prepared for this. It was very moving to like listen to people talk about these stories that they have about who they have to be okay, to be accepted, to be safe, and how much I was one of the youngest people in the room. I was the only Black person in the room. So on the surface, there wasn't a lot that connected us. But then like listening to people be vulnerable and share about their stories, I was like, this is really beautiful. Like, this is really incredible. This is an incredible tool to get to this level of vulnerability and potential transformation. And that's what sold me.
So what is the difference between Chichi, who first discovered the Enneagram, and the Chichi of today?
That's a great question. So many things. So many things. I mean, we're talking about a period of about a decade. So I would say, one, I'm kind of over the Enneagram. I know that's probably not what you thought I was going to say on this podcast, but I'm kind of over it. And I think it's a beautiful, I really do think it's a beautiful tool. I think it's such a wonderful thing. And I'm happy for everybody who is still very excited about it. I love that. When I meet somebody and they're like, I'm like so passionate about the Enneagram, it's like the thing I want to talk about all the time. I'm like, ooh, let me see myself out. Because I'm not in the same place. But what I mean by that is that I feel like, so I got to know the Enneagram right as it was starting to have its like, moment in the spotlight, which lasted for years. And I just got so sick of how, like we do with most things in this culture in particular, we take everything and turn it into either a performance or like a commodity. It's just like, now I can use this as a way to put people in boxes. I can use this as a way to figure out who I like and I don't like. I can, for a moment, interior designers were doing, design styles based on your Enneagram. And I'm like, y'all are exhausting. Like, why? And I do feel like, I do believe that the Enneagram is a tool that can help us deepen our self-awareness and also deepen our commitment to like our collective liberation. And there are so many tools. So the Enneagram is one of the tools I use. It's not the only tool that I use. Yeah. And I feel like how we hold the tool is really important. you know, like a hammer can be used for destruction or for beauty. And so I just got sick of being around people who feel like they're better than other people because they're doing quote unquote spiritual work, because they're doing all this Enneagram stuff. But like when you look at the way they live and the way they talk about people and the way they show up, I'm like, where is the work you're doing? I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time seeing the actual evidence that you are actually participating in spiritual work. And so the performance of it turned me off to it. I'm still very, this might sound to someone listening like I don't do anything with Enneagram anymore. I'm still very involved. I'm faculty at the Narrative Enneagram, and I still do a lot of Enneagram work. But like, it's not outside of those settings, you probably won't hear me talk about it. Because I feel like there's so much, it's in the same way. So my background is in therapy. It's in the same way that a lot of people have started using therapeutic language now, in like common, everyone's a gaslighter and everyone's a narcissist. You know what I mean? And so it's like, you don't even know what that word means. Like, you don't know, but it's like, oh, now I have this language to use to talk about why I don't like my ex because he's a narcissist. It's like, do you know what that means? And so that's kind of how I feel about it now, where it's just like, I want us to pause and be more curious about what we are saying, what we are saying is important to us, the language that we use, and then whether it aligns with our values. If at any point my use of the Enneagram does not align with my values around being, honest and committed to growth and liberation, then I don't want it. Yeah. So I really don't actually know if I answered your question, but that's what came up for me.
No, I appreciate your honesty in that, because when we tie our egos into whatever we approach, it becomes something else. It's become something to make me, like you said, make me better than, oh, I'm doing this work and everything. And I hear people say this a lot, and I kind of cringe, like, yeah, well, doing my work. And it's like, what does that mean? If it's not making you a better person, if it's not making you accountable, and, but if it's something that puts you on a pedestal and make you feel like you're better than other people, then it's performative and it's defeats the purpose. So I totally feel what you're saying. I didn't expect you to answer it like that, but I totally get that. There are different approaches to the Enneagram, and you chose the narrative Enneagram. And I didn't know that you studied Enneagram in business as well. Why these two schools of thought? Because there are many schools of thought, many different teachers and everything. What attracted you to first the narrative Enneagram and then the school of business, the Enneagram in business, excuse me?
Yeah, so the narrative Enneagram, like I was saying earlier, was just like a natural, for me at least, it felt like a natural progression from my what I was studying in grad school around narrative therapy and what I was doing with like clients at the time. I was like, this makes sense to me, this approach to exploring personality and growth and all of that. I was also drawn to it. I think one of the reasons why I wasn't as interested after that first info session at that person's house was, again, because it was so reductionist. And at the time, one of the things we were using was the Myers-Briggs. And so I was like, well, I already have this one that's like pretty reductionist in its own way, that we're using, where it's like, okay, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Are you perceiving or just, and so learning more about the narrative and it really was that first 6-day long intensive, which is not it's not a commitment. That was just like if you want an intro, come experience this. And then if you want to stay cool, if you don't want to. So I didn't go into it with like any plans to keep studying the Enneagram, but I think just the experience of learning from people's stories, not just being given information and like memorizing information, because there's so many things I remember from that. And that, again, that was like almost a decade ago, but there's so much I remember from my first intensive that is not about what the facilitators said. I just remember people stories. I remember like a 65-year-old white man who led with type 3 crying in front of us, talking about how, he has worked his whole life to feel like he's valuable and lovable and still doesn't feel that way. And I was just like, oh my gosh, so it's like, it's the impact of, I think it's so, it shouldn't be, but in the world that we live in, it's so courageous to be your true self and to like let people see your vulnerability. And so in the ways that the narrative invites that, it felt so much more attractive to me, because I've also read the books and the books are great, but there's just something about hearing somebody's story that impacts you in a different way. So that's why I was drawn to that. And then the other one is just like a short little course around like coaching and Enneagram and business that I wanted to try out. And, at the time I was like, I think I might want to try this with organizations and do some of that kind of work. And so it made sense to do it there. That was actually the first place though that I met Milton. So that was fun it's one of my memories from there. Yeah. Yeah.
Made it worth it. He's an amazing person.
Yes, indeed. 100%.
I'm thankful for him. Let's get into your book, The Enneagram for Black Liberation, which again, when I saw the title, I was like, oh man, this is powerful. What led you to, first of all, to write that book? And what does the word liberation mean to you personally?
I wasn't looking to write that book, actually. I was at the beginning of where I expressed a few minutes ago of being over the Enneagram. So this was in 2020, actually. So like a few months into the pandemic. And I was definitely kind of in the mind space of like, yeah, I'm really over this. And there was so much else that was happening in the world. But I had I've written since I was a little girl. I wrote my first novel when I was 11. It was terrible, but I wrote it. It was 10 chapters long. So I've been writing my whole life.
Wow.
And it's always been, I don't even think calling it a goal is accurate. I think the more accurate thing to say is I've always known I would write I would publish a book, but this was not the book I was planning to write or looking to write. And it just happened that I was doing some work with the writers' school in Canada, and they put me on the website, and in my bio, she had written, Chichi Agorom is blah, 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 an author. And normally I would like correct that, like, okay, I'm not an author. That's nice, but I'm not an author. And I was just like, well, let's just speak it into existence. Yep, I'm an author. And so I posted that in my stories on Instagram. And then one of my friends, Abby Robbins, who's the author of The Conscious Enneagram, reached out and said, if you're serious about that, like I can, because their book had just come out, I think earlier that year or the year before. And so they were like, I can give you any helpful information you want about the process and like what it was like for me, any way I could be helpful, which was really, really kind. So I took them up on that, and we had like a Zoom conversation, maybe on a Friday. They gave me really helpful tips for like writing a proposal and blah, blah, blah. And then the next Monday, so like 3 days later, I get a text from them that's like, so my editor just reached out to me and asked, it said that she's interested in a book about the Enneagram, but written from the perspective of, people who hold marginalized identities, and asked if I knew anybody that I would recommend. Could I send her your name? And I was like, all right, sure. And so that's how it came to be. I, set up a meeting with the editor, pitched my idea, and the rest is history, as they say. But I wasn't looking to write. I mean, once she asked me, what would you write? I'm like, well, this is what I would want to focus on. This is what I think needs to be said that hasn't been said. And then, they were like, yes, absolutely, let's do it. But it wasn't something where I was like dreaming about writing an Enneagram book in general. in fact, in the process of writing it, I just kept laughing to myself because I was like, you literally just said you're sick of this. And here you are writing a book. And now you're going to have to talk about it. But I'm really grateful for it, though. I'm grateful for the people that it has found and the ways that it's impacted them. And it's opened so many incredible doors and like places where I didn't ever think that I didn't consider, not to say that it's impossible. It just wasn't on my list of like places that my book could go or people it could impact. And so I'm really, really grateful for it, even though it wasn't part of my plan. So, yeah.
So what was the some of the initial reactions to once you put that Enneagram book, the Enneagram for Black Liberation out? What do you remember as far as just once you put it out there, some of the first reactions to it?
It's been received with so much love right from the very beginning. I was nervous because, often if you're talking about Black liberation, there's usually a sprinkle of white supremacists who don't like that. And so I was nervous because
sure.
I was like, what's the backlash going to be? Of course, there are people who are like, why is the Enneagram racialized? And what does this have to do with anything? So, but honestly, I'm sure that exists in conversations somewhere, but not to my face. And I don't know why that is, to be honest with you. I feel that about so many things. Like, I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like sometimes people, you know what, that's a tangent that we don't need to go down. but it's just really been love from day one.
I love tangents, so please feel free to go down there if you want to.
I don't know that it's helpful. I was just gonna say that I feel like something I've noticed is that it seems to me, I don't know if it's true for other people, but it seems to me that sometimes people are like afraid to like be stupid in front of me in my face, which I personally love. I was going to bring this up to say because I love it. Like in high school, that was my reputation. Like, just leave me alone or like face the consequences. So maybe I feel like I'm giving off a more like softer, open energy, but still I noticed that people will, even when my book first came out, the people who had some things to say, they would say it to other people who knew me. And then those people would say it to me. And I'm like, you have my email. You couldn't say that to my face. But so all that to say, all that I have gotten, the reviews, the messages, I still get emails to this day from like random people who are like, I read your book and I just wanted you to know that it's, it was really impactful in these ways and blah, blah, blah. Someone told me that, their mother has dementia and is in and out, most of the time out, but in and out of like this current reality. And they read my book to their mom. And he was saying, I think she's a 3. She's much older, of course. He's like, but I think she's a 3. So he read her the 3 chapter, and at the end of it he asked her like, did you hear that? Did you hear all of that? And he said she had tears in her eyes because she was like, that felt like me. And so it's just like little stories like that I'm like, that's wild, because in my mind, writing it, I'm writing about a system that's existed for a while. I'm just centering Black folks. And I don't feel like I'm doing anything necessarily revolutionary other than the fact that this is the first of its kind. But then to hear those stories and to talk to people for whom it's been really impactful is like a reminder to myself to like hold more space for the weight of it instead, because my tendency is to be like, yeah, it's a good book. I wrote it. It's great. It's doing good work out in the world. And then that's it. But those stories and that love that I have received is like, oh, okay, this is bigger than you are often giving it credit for. Yeah.
Yeah. I listened to the audio book. And I hit Milton up immediately, and I was like, yo, this is amazing. Because you captured a nuance. I don't know, it's just a unique voice. It's not super clinical. It's like heartfelt, and it just touched a space that I hadn't, felt before, dealing with an Enneagram book. And and again, like, sometimes we can't see the impact because we're just the vessel, as generic as that sounds,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
But it was just amazing. You you talked about, you referred to the personality types or the personality structures as armor. That was one of the things that stuck out with me. And your podcast is called From Armor to Ease. Why do you refer to the personality structures as armor? Excuse me. And um, what particularly is the difference? This is a two-part question with people of color. How we have to, the way we wear the armor compared to those who are not um, part of marginal, which you refer to it as marginalized identities, those who carry marginalized identities.
Yeah, so first part, I refer to it as armor because honestly, that's how it made the most sense to me in my own personal work with it. Was or let me rephrase that. That's what was most liberating for me in my personal work with it, was realizing, oh, these are things that I do and have done to keep myself safe, to navigate the world, but it's not all of who I am. And that feels exciting, terrifying, but also exciting because it's like, oh, it's like I have choice, that I can use this when it's necessary. I can put this on when I need that protection, but I can also learn how to take it off. I can also learn who I am when I'm not just in these, like, inside of these survival strategies. And so the visual of armor for me was very helpful in the sense that it created some space between who I am and these survival strategies. I feel like in a lot of conversations around the Enneagram, and maybe it's changing now, but like maybe 3-4 years ago, it was often talked about like you are your type. So
Yeah.
like there is no Ahmad and there is no type 5. It's like one and the same. Um, and within that, there's really no access to choice because it's just like, well, this is just who I am. Can't do
Mm-hmm.
nothing
Mm-hmm.
about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that is one of the ways it offers um, some freedom and liberation, is that access to choice, to be like, there are times when I need my armor. And so then tying it into like, um, the experience of Black folks and those who hold marginalized identities, it is most of the time we need our armor to navigate the world as it is. And one of the things I, had found for myself and then with the people I was in community with, when you are armored all of the time or most of the time, because you have to be, you don't know or forget how to take off that armor. You forget that you're not just the armor. You forget, you don't know how to take it off. And also because you're like, so if you think about like, sometimes I lead people through an exercise where you like visualize what your armor is, because it
Mm.
looks, the experience of it is different from person to person. So it's not just one type of thing. But for the sake of this conversation, if you imagine that, my armor is a suit, like a metal suit that I put on to like walk through the world and get things done. If I never take that off, I forget what like my soft skin feels like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I forget
Yeah.
like that there's anything beneath all of that like hard, tough armor. And so I don't know what it's like to be hugged
Mm.
on my skin, right?
Yeah.
Like all my
Yeah.
hugs are from your body to my metal armor. I don't
Yes.
know
Yeah.
what it's like to, all of those sorts of things. Everything is navigated or experienced through the armor.
Yeah.
And so that includes our experience of safety. Like, how do you know what it's like for you to actually be safe? What does safety feel like in your body if you're always armored?
Yeah.
Because one of the invitations I offer people is like being able to, the Enneagram, I think, gives us good practices to help us be able to recognize when we are safe and then when we can like take off the armor in safe places. But in working with a lot of Black folks and a lot of Black women in particular, it's like, but I don't know when that is. Because even when it's just me, even when I'm by myself, I am still armored. I am still holding myself to the same binary story, even when it's just me. And so, whether it's that I'm beating myself up for not knowing enough, or I'm beating myself up for, failing or not being whatever enough, I'm doing that when it's just me. So how do I create safety within myself so that I get some respite? I get a break from, I have to wear this out there in the world, but when I come back here, when it's just me or me and a trusted person or whatever, I get some rest because I can take this off.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's like one of the ways that it's helpful within Black and Brown communities, with people who often have to be armored out in the world. And so then we bring the armor home with us. We take the armor everywhere. We don't know who we are outside of the armor. And then the other piece, which I read about in my book, is how sometimes, especially for people who are like on the forefront of activism, for example, it can become like another form of armor,
Yeah.
And so again, it's like, my question is, if all of the things that we are working towards, dreaming towards, fighting for, are not going to be fully realized in our lifetime, then does that mean we don't get to experience rest and ease? Does that mean, like, back to my, visual of that armor, does that mean that I never get to experience what it's like to be hugged underneath my armor until the world is like perfectly just?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that I see as the work of like being able to, one, name the armor as distinct and separate from the entirety of who I am. It's something that I use, I can choose to use, and it has many gifts and it has some challenges, but it's not all of who I am. And the more I remember that and the more space I create, the more access I have to be like, okay, so if this is not how I always have to be, who am I free to be in this moment? How can I allow myself to experience something a little different in this moment? And how can that help free me in this moment?
As I'm listening to you, I don't know why I go back to this experience that I had. I've done spoken word / rap. And in my early 20s, when you talk about the armor, and this is when I really noticed this, there was I'm from Richmond, Virginia. There was a local group, and we were in this, like, I don't know, like this restaurant / they had like stage and open mic. And I was up there with them, and me and my crew, we were freestyling with these guys as our like local artists and everything. And we were just up there having a good time. And when I got off the stage, there were two young white women. They were my age. I was like 19 at the time. And they just sat there and they smiled at us. And it was weird because I'm not used to Black women feeling safe enough to smile like that. It was just an experience that just stuck with me. So when you talk about the armor, it was just like, I go back to the experience. It was just like, my experience with a lot of Black women is, I don't know if I'm safe to smile and show that vulnerability with you. So I'm glad you named it in your book, like the strong Black woman thing, where it's like it's a virtue. But no, I'm not free to be feminine. I'm not free to feel safe like that. So I'm so glad you named that. But I don't know why that experience came back to me.
No, I love it. And I also feel like well, at least I would imagine that as you were on the stage too, like you probably felt like free, like having fun up there and doing your thing, right? And it just makes me think of, Toni Morrison says the function of freedom is to free someone else. I just think about like the more that when I allow myself to show up in those spaces more unarmored, it's almost like it gives permission to other people to be like, oh, okay, I don't have to be so, armored up here. Okay,
Yeah.
I need a break too. I could take it off. It's like,
Yeah.
but we all are armored in all of our different ways. And so it's like, all right, if you're armored, I'm gonna keep my armor up too. But like the more there's like that opening and that softening, that has a ripple effect, which is what that story made me think of too. Yeah.
Another thing that came up as I was listening to your book again today is I noticed, because I'm in this work, because I'm such an open person, I've noticed being in conversations with like even male and female Black colleagues, and I'm just so vulnerable. And it's almost like this awkward, dead silence. Like, hey, this is what it is, and this is how I feel. And it's almost like they don't know how to respond to the vulnerability because it's so foreign, because as Black men, we have to wear that armor. And here I am in this work, and I'm just like, it's probably weird to them, like, whoa, it's a bit much. What comes up to with you comes up to you when I say that?
100%. I think this is why liberation work is our collective responsibility and not just an individual responsibility, because I think you're 100% right. And like, we have these conditioned expectations of how you're supposed to be as a Black man, how you're supposed to be as a Black woman, right? And everything in between. And so, if I am not doing my own work to name those things, to, disengage from that system, then when you show up as vulnerable, that's weird to me. I don't like that. You should go back to, the way it's supposed to be, because I don't know what to do with that. And in actuality, it's like, I don't know what to do with it. But we are not, in our society as a whole, we are not practiced or skilled in being beginners. This is a performance-based society. So you want to be seen as like, I already know what I'm supposed to do. I'm already like good at this. I already know how to respond. We don't want to be seen as beginners because it's vulnerable and it's scary. And there's like the potential for being seen as failures, right? So when you show up with vulnerability and it's outside of the norm that I'm used to, instead of allowing space for myself to be a beginner and be like, I don't know what to do with this, but I'm going to learn.
Yeah.
I make it about you. You're the problem because you're going outside of what's, expected. And I'm feeling uncomfortable and I don't know how to be with my own discomfort. So I'm gonna make it about you.
Wow.
And I think that that's like, that is our work collectively. There's so much that we like put on each other. It's actually our own invitation to pause and be like, okay, what's this bringing up for me? Can I allow myself to just not know? And like, I'm preaching to myself here, but can I allow myself to not know and to figure it out and to be a beginner and to sit with the discomfort that brings up, instead of requiring the other person to change or shift in a way that makes me more comfortable. This is also like the community practice with Enneagram work, I think, and especially with thinking about it as armor, is recognizing how, it's one thing to think about your type and your armor as just related to me. It's, I use this to protect myself. Yeah. But I am also subconsciously requiring other people to fit into my story of how the world is and how people should be and, all of those things without recognizing it. So I'm not actually allowing you to be fully and freely you, because there are elements of you being fully yourself that will rub up against my armor, my story, my protective mechanism. And I don't like that. So I'm going to subconsciously require you to shift, or I will remove myself from relationship with you because it pushes against my armor. And that's our work. That's the collective communal work there. Yeah.
I'm glad you named that in your book too. You talk about, and I'm not saying it exactly how you said it, but it's just like there's certain barriers that are in place when it comes to people who hold marginalized identities, as you refer to it. Um, sometimes even in the Enneagram space, I'm a blue collar person. Like I always joke and I say like I'm always like the brokest person in the room when it comes to the Enneagram space. It's just like I'm not supposed to be here. I work for a light rail system. I mean, I'm not a executive coach or anything, but I'm happy to be there because for years, like I wanted to go to Helen Palmer's. I've been studying Enneagram since 1996. I just couldn't afford to go to California. I couldn't afford to go to New York and study with Russ. So I'm so grateful for the work of Dr. Egerton and yourself and Milton and others, because now I'm able to, be in the space that I've wanted to be in for years. But there are barriers in place. So when certain solutions are given, right? Like, and you name this in the book. I'm not saying exactly how you said it, but it's just kind of like, okay, if I'm facing eviction, telling me to like follow my breath might not be the immediate solution.
Right, right.
So there are things in place.
Mhm.
But I'm just so glad that you named that, like, because I think sometimes in the collective, our white counterparts might not understand that. I don't have the luxury to necessarily just like take a month off and study with Russ, or study with this
Right,
person and everything.
right.
So I'm glad you named the need to address these issues. What has been the response from Black people? And this is a general question. As far as just you naming these things in your book, what is some of the feedback you've gotten from those who may not have be in that space to enjoy certain things as maybe our white counterparts have, or even the Black counterparts who are more successful in that area?
Hmm. It's really been like beautiful responses. In the maybe the first or second week after my book came out, I remember one of the very first people who messaged me, and I was like, oh, this is exactly why I wrote this book. It was a Black woman, and she had also been studying the Enneagram for a long time, but she sent me a beautiful message about how this is the first time she felt like, this was actually for her, that she didn't have to do all the labor to figure out how to find her place inside of the Enneagram, that this immediately already just created space for her. And that was really beautiful. And I was doing, for the first year and a half after my book came out, I was running these process groups for Black women around the Enneagram, but it's called At Ease, and we spent 3 months together exploring like what's your armor and who are you outside your armor, and then what's our like commitment to each other in terms of our collective wholeness and liberation. And from that, there were just so many beautiful expressions of like, I remember somebody saying, this is the first time that it's felt tangible, like that I feel like I'm understanding what it could look like for me to have a practice that allows me to experience freedom and liberation now, not just as like an ideal that will come when all the injustice has been addressed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, like I have not gone back to read my book since it came out, because I feel like that'd be weird. But there are things that there are things that, obviously, and this is the nature of continuing to like learn and grow. You're always learning more things. And so there are
Yeah.
things now that if I went back, I'd be like, okay, I would add this or I would shift this. And, I think I might be able to actually add some stuff in when the paperback comes out. But so there's more stuff that I would love to like expand on, but as it stands, I feel like the feedback I've gotten is a lot of, this made space for me in a way that nothing else with the Enneagram communities has made space for me. This gave me permission to like really put myself at the center of the story instead of like try to navigate, to find a spot somewhere and it still doesn't fit. So I'm really thankful for that.
As I was preparing to have you on. There's just certain people that, you know, I could probably talk to you for like 4 hours and not scratch the surface. And I was just like, okay, all right. So I'll say this as we bring it to a close, because I definitely, oh man, I mean, you bring so much to the space. I don't know. Sometimes we can't see ourselves, right? It takes other people to reflect back to us like how important we are. And just your book, I had Adaya on last week, and she talked about
Yeah.
your book and the impact that has had on her. But I want to close out by talking about your mother. You talked about in the space, or the part of your book about power and vulnerability. What has been the impact of your mother? And you talked about her with power. Could you share with us like the impact she has had on your life and why you chose to name her as the when you talk about power, you associated her immediately with that chapter of power?
That's a great question. And I get very tender when I think about my mother. So I will not cry. I won't. I will not. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Um yeah, in my book I mentioned her in that power of vulnerability section, like you mentioned, because I think of, like I watched my mother growing up and I think of her, thought of her as a very powerful person. But but not in the power over type of way that we see here or associate with power here, where it's like I am. And she's always been in positions of authority. My mother is a pastor. She's been a pastor my whole life, in charge of a church. She has like a leadership institute. Like she's in charge of a lot of different things. So she is in positions of power. But what I noticed and was more intrigued by and watching her was like the quietness of her power, and then also how she uses her power to care for, to make sure people have resources. Like it was never power to like hoard or to like control, even though she's a one, so there's some stuff for control there. but but really it's just like her heart is to use, if she has a little bit of power, all she wants is to make a difference, to make things better for other people. And so I feel like that's one of the big things I walked away from my childhood with, in observing her, is like, one, power doesn't have to be loud. Which honestly is one of like my favorite compliments that I've gotten in my adulthood, is from random people. This is not even like people who know each other or are in the same type of part of my life, but I've heard very consistently, like, you have such a quiet power about you. And I'm like, thank you. And I feel like in my mind, I credit my mother, because it's like, she is a powerful woman. She is not loud about it. It's almost like this sense of like, and now I feel like people who are loud and showy with their power, I'm like, you don't trust your own power. Because if you did trust it, you don't need to be this loud about it. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons I mentioned her in there, was to illustrate that visual of what I saw growing up, of, she, whenever she had, and it used to make me so mad as a kid, because whenever, she's a very generous, like big-hearted person. So if we had enough, the extra went to help somebody else, and it would piss me off, because I'm like, but I have a list of things I want. Like, I would be able to afford this if you didn't feel like it was necessary to take care of everybody. But it stuck with me. Like it stuck with me as like, this is one of the ways that you use power for the benefit of the whole and not just yourself. And yeah.
That's beautiful. I was really touched listening to you talk about her, and I can see, okay, just the influence that she's had on you. Yeah. So As we come to a close, I'm glad that I know you over the Enneagram, so I'm glad that I got you when I could.
I still have so many Enneagram commitments and I will keep with them, but it's just like, I don't know. I say, okay, maybe let me edit that. Let me edit it a little bit. I am not, and maybe I said this in my talk too. I'm not passionate about the Enneagram. I am passionate about what the Enneagram can help us do. So those are the conversations that feel really life-giving to me. That's the part of the work that feels really life-giving to me, is the parts where it's like, okay, I'm using this knowledge and this information to then move into, so then how does this help us move towards freedom? Instead of just like, okay, now I know all these things and all the in-depth things about like subtypes and this type and da-da-da-da. But it's like, okay, and are you freer than you were yesterday? Are you more aware and awake than you were yesterday? If so, amazing. If not, I don't want to be part of this conversation, you know? So that's more of what I mean.
I get what you're saying. I mean, I'm messing with you, but yeah, it's just like, it's not like a feel-good club. It's a tool. And if it's not used towards our collective liberation, like you said, it's just kind of like, we're not looking to join a club and feel good about ourselves. We don't need that. We don't have the luxury to do that.
We don't have the time. The world is on fire. We got shit to do. Sorry,
yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can. You can. Chichi, Agorom, I am so honored. We talked in California, and I asked you, I said, "Can you come on my podcast?" It's hard for a 5 to ask, So
I'm glad you did, and I'm glad that we were able to do it. This was a really good time. Thank you for the very thoughtful questions too.
Thank you, and this can't be the last time that you come on.
It won't.
So, Chichi Agorom, www.chichiagorom.com. The book is called The Enneagram for Black Liberation. Is a must read. Adayo said so as well last week, and I just love, and I love the fact that you narrated it yourself, by the way, too. What made you do that? What made you decide to do that and have somebody else to do that for you?
They did offer me the option of having somebody else, and like, I did a poll in my stories when they asked me that question, and I was like, I'm not an audiobook reader. I'm listening to my first audiobook ever, like just this week. I don't usually do audiobooks. So I was like, people who listen to audiobooks, y'all tell me, do you have a preference? Like, do you prefer to read a book narrated by the author? And I just remember so many people being like, we've read so many books written by like a Black person or a person of color, narrated by some white person from Kentucky.
Oh my God.
And there's like, no, it's like, it just is so like not okay in your brain as you're processing.
Oh,
and so
my
I was like,
God.
all right, that's fair. So I decided to do it. And I'm so glad I did, because first of all, it was so much fun. I love discovering things that I'm good at that I never knew I was good at. We had like 3 or 4 days allotted to record the book, and I did it in a day and a half. And he was like, have you done this before? And I was like, no, it's my first time. So that was really fun. And I was like, ooh, should I narrate audiobooks now? But anyways, I'm glad I did it. So
I'm glad you did too. It wouldn't have hit the same with
it. Because I wouldn't have been able to pick the person. It was either I do it or they pick a person. And so I was like, yeah, let me just do it. Yeah.
Chichi Agorom, host of From Armor to Ease podcast, author of The Enneagram for Black Liberation, Enneagram teacher, and just great human being. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to talking to you again. This is Total Confidence Podcast. It's Chichi Agorom, y'all. I hope y'all take time to parse this apart, because it's a lot in this. And we'll be back.